Rarely have two such distinct genres as science fiction and horror come together so well. And some filmmakers just have a knack for marrying technology, science, and space with our deepest real and otherworld fears, deftly tapping into the tropes of each genre. So with all that said, I am Gareth, this is What Culture Horror, and here are 10 movies that perfectly blend horror and sci-fi. Number 10, Pandorum. A deep space, ship-based horror that is neither Alien or Event Horizon, Pandorum manages to tread familiar territory while delivering a unique and uniquely rewarding experience. The film opens on the Elysium, an interstellar ark sent to colonize a habitable planet across the universe. But something has gone terribly wrong. The power is out, most of the ship's inhabitants are dead, and gangs of monstrous mutant creatures roam the corridors. It's up to two members of the flight crew, Corporal Bauer and Lieutenant Peyton, to find out what happened and get the ship back on course. Now you can be forgiven for never having heard of Pandorum, as despite starring Dennis Quaid and Ben Foster, it released in 2009 to no fanfare, and didn't even make its modest $33 million budget back. One half of the problem was the distributor's uncertainty in how to market it, as it didn't seem a fit for either the Star Wars or Halloween crowds. The other half was the fact that both sci-fi and horror were stuck in a strange in-between at the time, untethered from big franchises and yet to find success in the indie revival. Nevertheless, the film expertly enmeshes its sci-fi and horror elements, making smart use of technology to keep the action contained and the characters lost in post-cryo fugue states, alongside consistently unspooling horrors pertaining to the creatures, the ship's fate, and the space psychosis known as Pandorum, which threatens to doom them all. Number 9, Pitch Black. The first of the Riddick trilogy, which is soon to be a tetralogy, Pitch Black introduces Richard Riddick, the last of the Furian race, an infamous criminal and an all-out badass. Long before Vin Diesel was making his name synonymous with the Fast movies, Corona, and Family, he was getting grubby in the dark on a remote planet whose shadows hide something sinister. Riddick escapes his confines when a transport escorting him to prison crash lands, and he must use his combat and survival skills, along with his now iconic pair of enhanced eyes, to take on an array of monstrous creatures. David Tui's film may have attracted comparisons to the hammy Starship Troopers on arrival, but it soon entered a league of its own, demonstrating that neither the slapstick nonsense of Troopers, nor the epic intergalactic landscapes of Star Wars, nor even the claustrophobic bottle scenarios of Alien were necessary to make a great picture out in the darker parts of the galaxy. Instead, he creates a nightmarish world of savagery where alien creatures hunt Riddick and his companions in bloody fashion, and restricts them only by what is at once the most obvious and yet ingenious device: they can't come out in daylight. Thus, when an eclipse arrives, the film kicks the horrors up to a whole new level. Now, speaking of sci-fi horror movies, I want to know right now, what do you think is the greatest sci-fi horror of all time? You let me know in the comments down below. Number 8, VHS Beyond. VHS Beyond, the latest movie in what has somewhat ironically become the straight-to-video film franchise, boldly goes where only a few VHS segments have gone before. This outing in the found footage anthology horror series is united by the theme of futuristic and otherworldly encounters, offering up a documentary-style frame, complete with real-life talking heads to see it through, like Corridor Digital's Nico Puringer and Sam Gorski, and the Superstitious Times' Brian Baker. 6 handheld, first-person stories unfold across the film's runtime, each challenging our assumptions about both what is out there and what is already down here with us. A special police unit take down a nest of zombies protecting a bird-like alien, a Bollywood star is revealed to be an android, a skydiving adventure gets interrupted by UFOs, and a woman finds a way to turn an animal rights group into her own fur babies. Each segment is bleaker than the last, managing not just to blend horror and science fiction, but to dig into what makes these possibilities so deeply terrifying. By pairing everyday people and everyday situations with the beyond, the film brings us face to face with the horrors of technology and our unexplored universe. And not a Black Mirror in sight. Number 7, Under the Skin. Adapted from Michelle Faber's livelier but far inferior novel of the same name, Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin stretches the limits of what is possible in contemporary art house cinema, taking a big Hollywood star in Scarlett Johansson, making her small and unassuming, and spending nearly 2 hours of relative silence trawling the streets and coasts of Scotland. While this sounds like neither science fiction nor horror, both genres are appropriately lurking just below the surface here. Johansson plays an unnamed woman who picks up men on the streets of Glasgow and takes them home to be submerged in a dimensionally impossible liquid abyss and, relieved of their skin. The woman is an alien working for others of her kind, towards a mysterious goal whose end is never made apparent, while struggling to locate herself between worlds. And this is precisely what makes Under the Skin so effective. Now, there are aliens among us wearing our skins, luring us to our deaths, is bad enough. But that their purpose is so opaque as to seem pointless, and thus to render their violence and murder the same, is bleak beyond reproach. The film's horror and sci-fi are thus inseparable. Take away one and you take away the other, leaving only a film about a woman who travels around Scotland having brief affairs with average men. Probably wouldn't have been as memorable, would it? Number 6, Megan. Another popular triumph from the Blumhouse production line, Jared Johnston's Megan draws on a storied history of robot horror, while putting a relevant contemporary spin on it and adding a new name to the canon, Megan, with a 3. Played by Amy Donald and voiced by Jenna Davis, Megan is a child-size AI doll whose primary purpose is to offer friendship, advice, and safety to young users. But when its creator, Gemma, assigns the doll to her adopted niece, Katie, Megan's overactive protection function and ever-evolving independence begin to create a pattern of fatalities and bloodshed around the trio. Johnston uses the very real possibility of functional humanoid AI to embed violence and malevolence at the heart of the family unit. Megan functions as both scientific wonder and classic slasher villain, incorporating aspects of both into something whose terror resides in the familiarity of the technology. Sure, we may still be a couple of decades away from having android helpers in the home, but the real and present fears that films like Megan tap into cannot be overstated, folks. And look at those terrifying dance moves. If you're having fun looking at these perfect blends of sci-fi and horror, then go and tap that subscribe button and you're gonna get even more, you lucky person. Number 5, Sunshine. Danny Boyle may be better known for his tense, character-based dramas like Slumdog Millionaire and 127 Hours, but that does not mean he can't pull a fully fledged genre flick out the bag when the occasion calls for it. And while his science-based zombie horror 28 Days Later tends to get the lion's share of plaudits and audience attention, we turn instead to one of the more unsung films in his filmography here, Sunshine. Penned by Alex Garland, the film is set in our solar system in the near future and follows a team of scientist astronauts led by Cillian Murphy's Robert Capa aboard the Icarus II, whose mission is to reignite our dying sun using a stellar bomb. Along the way, they discover a distress signal from their ship's predecessor, Icarus I. But when they investigate, they discover disaster, a charred crew, an undelivered payload, and a crazed zealot of a captain played by Mark Strong, intent on doing whatever he can to prevent humanity contravening God's will by surviving. Leaning closer to the science fiction end of the sci-fi horror spectrum, Sunshine roots itself in convincing depictions of space, a conceivable mission, and real-world characters. This is compounded and offset by its horrific villain, whose appearance, thanks to unfiltered sun exposure, is part Freddy Krueger and part Cenobite, and whose intentions are religious, extremist, and irrationally human. As a result, the film feels equally uncanny and real, interweaving its genres to generate an astounding conclusion. Yeah, if you've not caught this one yet, you are in for a treat. Number 4, Infinity Pool. Brandon Cronenberg's third body horror feature, Infinity Pool, arrived just 2 short years ago, with Alexander Skarsgård and Mia Goth leading the cast, and a more sizable budget than the director has ever enjoyed before on display throughout. The film sees blocked writer James holidaying in the fictional seaside country of Lee Tolka, where the luxuries are endless, and the locals more than a little pissed off. He encounters Gabby and her husband, and through a series of unfortunate events, winds up in prison charged with murder and facing the death penalty. Lucky for him, the country has an agreement in place for their affluent international visitors, in which they create an exact genetic clone of the offender that suffers the punishment in their place, for a handsome fee of course. On the surface of it, Infinity Pool challenges us to consider questions of personhood, individuality, and the mind, as pretty much every sci-fi feature with technologically created doppelgangers has done before. However, it's in the abuse of futuristic and seemingly world-changing technology for simultaneously mundane and reprehensible purposes that the film finds its stride and sinks into horror. James becomes detached from his previous life and open to more daring, murderous, and horrendous acts, joining a small group of elites who just do as they please and let their money deal with the consequences. Sound familiar? Yep. Number 3, Videodrome. One of the definitive techno-horrors of the past half-century, David Cronenberg's Videodrome managed to preempt and predict society's increasing infatuation with video technology from back in the early 1980s, at the very beginning of this now all-encompassing era we are living in. Cronenberg looks at our obsession for violent and extreme content through the lens of Max Wren, a smut TV station president who accidentally pirates Videodrome, a plotless show featuring the torture, humiliation, and death of its participants. Assuming this to be the next wave of television sensationalism, Max tracks down the show's creator, but in doing so loses himself in a world where the separation of fiction and truth, television and reality are not so clear as he once thought. Videodrome foregrounds our fear of digital manipulation as Max's mind and body becomes ever more subsumed by technology, hallucinating his way into the service of nefarious actors and becoming part machine in the process. It is the horrors of reality television, social media, AI, and modern technology writ large. And yet Cronenberg could have had no idea just how prescient his vision would be. When a mere 30 years on, everyone from school age onwards would carry a personal video device that would provide instant, unfettered access into the darkest reaches of human misery and suffering. And all in the name of profit and entertainment. Hooray! Long live the new flesh! Number 2, Timecrimes. 18 years ago, director Nacho Vigalondo took a $2.5 million budget and turned out an indie time travel feature that made inroads at the festivals, and then failed to find distributors for global release. As a result, Timecrimes is one of the forgotten gems of international cinema, sitting astride science fiction and horror, employing commonplace tropes from each in new, exciting, and devastating ways. The film follows Hector, a man living the quiet life out in the Spanish countryside, who witnesses a woman undressing in the forest by his house and is unwittingly drawn into a game of cat and mouse involving a mystery bandaged man, a time machine, and a seemingly irreversible series of disasters. A cautionary tale for the ages, Timecrimes uses time travel to unwind a man's life, providing a litany of horrors, violence, murder, ruin, etc., that all stem from the improper use of technology and an absent reverence for the immutability of the future and past. As Hector travels back in time to try and maintain his own continuity and repair the mistakes of his future and past selves, he is ensnared by fate itself. And as we watching on realize with each subsequent time-based disaster that he couldn't have done differently, the true dread of the picture sets in. Number 1, Alien Romulus. Following a string of mediocre sequels and misguided prequels, it seemed for a long time that the Alien franchise would never again find the footing it enjoyed in the 1980s. And then came Romulus. Fede Alvarez's standalone slice of the Alien universe hit screens last year and managed to deliver deep nostalgia and a retro vibe without feeling overly derivative. Set between everyone's two favourite Alien flicks, the 1979 original and Aliens, Romulus places a small team team of orphaned colonists aboard the ruined Weyland-Yutani station Renaissance, in the hopes of finding the cryostasis equipment they need to jet off to an idyllic planet on the other side of space. Needless to say, once the team are aboard the ship's Romulus module, they come face to face with a few uninvited guests of the scaly, slimy, acid-spitty variety. Nice to see you again, old friends. As every devotee knows, the series has never had an issue marrying sci-fi and horror, and was really the first to do it on such a scale. Using that template, the film keeps tensions high, balancing exterior threats like space, oxygen, and deadly planetary rings with visceral interior horrors, including not just armies of facehuggers and xenomorphs, but a ghoulish new human xenomorph hybrid, birthed straight from one of the young human crew. I jumped right out of my skin when that face popped up on screen in the cinema. It freaked me out. Technology has rarely looked so grim as in Alvarez's hands, and the film has everything from evil androids to brutal spacescapes, and even a few delightfully sickening additions to the Xeno lore as well. A great horror sci-fi time was had here.